Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. So, we're doing something a little different and kind of special to me. Back in 2017, when I first started the show, I had the privilege of interviewing two people at the same time about their experiences escaping dangerous, very dangerous polygamous cults. And those people are LeBaron and Ruth Wariner. And each of them had written books. I was a part of both of their launch teams at the time, got to have Anna in our home, and she did a speaking event here. Just a lot of really kind of special things that happened around that time with those two. And the significance of having both of them on the show at the same time is that they're cousins, and their fathers, Joel and Ervil LeBaron, were both part of this violent polygamous cult, and there was a split in the group between the two brothers. So some people followed Joel and some people followed Ervil. Well, Ervil was not satisfied with that, and he actually put a hit out on his brother Joel and killed him. I think Ruth said when she was just a baby. So she never knew her father. Ruth never knew her father, but Anna was one of over 50 of Ervil's children. So Anna kind of knew her dad a little bit, and Ruth didn't know her dad at all. But they knew that there was this contention between the two sides of the family. However, both of them, when they were young, right around the young teenage years, 13 and 15, I believe, they escaped. And at different times, at different, circumstances, they didn't know each other at all. Fast forward to about 10 years ago, when Anna heard that there was this book coming out. She wanted to be a part of the book launch. Didn't know much about it. She messaged the author, said, "I'd love to read your book. It's a memoir. I'm really into memoirs. Would love to help with the launch." And come to find out that they were actually cousins, and that Anna's dad had put a hit out on Ruth's dad, resulting in his death. There was so much to these stories. Ruth Wariner wrote the New York Times bestselling memoir, The Sound of Gravel. And Anna LeBaron wrote The Polygamist Daughter, which has done a fantastic job. So the interview that I did with them together was the first one that they did together. They went on to do another interview with Jen Hatmaker on her podcast, For the Love. So I felt very honored that I got to be the first one to kind of facilitate a little bit of this conversation between the two of them, not just me, but they learned things about each other, and they were like, it was just this crazy dynamic of how they were kind of each seeking healing and finding that in different ways. And just living these kind of parallel lives that coincided with the writing of their books. So recently I reached back out to Anna, who I have this relationship with. Like I said, she was in our home, and we've stayed in touch over the years. And I said, Anna, we should do another interview because so much has happened since we talked last. There was a documentary about her family on Hulu. And this documentary, you can watch it there on Hulu now. It is called Daughters of the Cult. There's a few episodes that take you through the kind of the terror that her father, Ervil LeBaron, struck throughout his family and extended family and this religious cult. And then also it goes into the children of Ervil LeBaron and follows some of them and gives an idea of their experience and how they were processing it and how they have come together in some ways and figured out a path forward and that sort of thing. And so next week, we're going to publish that interview. And I thought we really need to replay a remix version of this interview that I did with the two of them, Ruth and Anna, 8 years ago. And so that's what we're doing today. I'm sharing with you that interview. I have edited it just a little bit more so that we could get to kind of the main points of the conversation. Here is the really beautiful conversation that I had with Anna and Ruth back in 2017. I hope you really enjoy it. Anna and Ruth, welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast.
Hi, thank you for having us. This is exciting.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
This has been a long time coming.
Yes, it really is. It's actually amazing when I think back to a couple of years ago when you and I met online to how this has come. It's just such a full circle in a sense. So I'm so honored to have you here and excited that we're getting to do this together. So thank you.
I'm excited to get to talk to you, and I'm excited to get to meet you in person in a few days, basically.
Yes, like right after we air this interview, the full interview, that very next week, that Monday, you're going to be at my house, and I'm so excited. And Ruth, someday we're going to meet too.
Oh, yes, we are.
There's no doubt about it.
I keep making it a habit to meet people online and then become in real life friends with them.
That's a very good habit to have. Yes. Okay. I'm gonna read your bios to start out with. Anna LeBaron is one of more than 50 children of infamous polygamous cult leader Orville LeBaron. Anna endured abandonment, horrific living conditions, child labor, and sexual grooming. At age 13, she escaped the violent cult, gave her life to Christ, and sought healing. A gifted communicator and personal growth activist, she's passionate about helping others walk in freedom. Anna lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and loves being mom to 5 grown children. Now, Ruth Wariner is an internationally renowned speaker and author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, The Sound of Gravel. At the age of 15, Ruth escaped Colonia LeBaron, the polygamist Mormon colony where she grew up, and moved to California. She raised her 3 youngest sisters in California and Oregon. After earning her GED, she put herself through college and graduate school, eventually becoming a high school Spanish teacher. She remains close to her siblings and is happily married. The Sound of Gravel is her first book. So, it is significant that you guys are cousins, but you didn't meet until just recently. So, Anna, since you kind of got the ball rolling on that, why don't you tell us how you met?
Oh my gosh, that's such a fun story. I love telling it. If it wasn't so
emotional.
It was very emotional. Here's how we met. Let me just start from the beginning, because you have to start there. I was on Twitter one day, and Ruth's publicist that I was following because of another author posted a tweet saying, here's this new memoir coming out in January. It's a must read. And there was nothing on there that would have alerted me that Ruth was my cousin. So I tweeted the author of the book, Ruth. And one of the things that I enjoy doing is promoting new books. And so I tweeted the author and said, Ruth, I'd love to read. I can't wait to read your book. Do you already have a launch team? Thinking that would already be a work in progress, and I could join in and read and promote the book because I love memoir. So a little bit later that day, I'm reading a Goodreads review on the book. And I don't think I've told you this, Ruth, but I was reading the Goodreads review because I thought, well, shoot, I've already offered to promote the book. I should see if it's any good. So I'm reading the review, and the review was amazing, but there still wasn't any clue that there was any connection between myself and the author. Then in the comments of the Goodreads review, someone says, I've read a lot of books about polygamy, and this is one of the great ones. And I went, what? So in my mind, I'm thinking there's a lot of polygamist communities, and I wonder which one she's part of. So I went back to her Twitter feed, found her website, started scrolling through her history tab, and lo and behold, I see a picture of her father, my Uncle Joel. And my blood kind of ran cold at that minute. And I went, oh no. And then I kept scrolling and I see my father's mugshot from when he was arrested. And there's a long story behind that whole sentence I just said.
Yeah, it is.
And I sat there and went, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've tweeted the author publicly, and she's part of my family that we haven't spoken to in more than 4 decades because of the events that transpired more than 4 decades ago that separated our families. So I felt horrible at that moment in time and didn't want to go and delete the tweet because that would even make it more awkward if Ruth had already seen it. And so there was a little bit of awkwardness there while I decided what to do.
Now, would she have known who you were based on your Twitter handle? Like, did it say Anna LeBaron? Would she have recognized that?
It did say Anna LeBaron. I was actually, when she tweeted me the first day, I was in New York City, which is why my publicist was tweeting about me, because I was doing a media event there. And I was also recording my audiobook. It was in October of 2015. And I was stuck in the studio for 3 days. And she had reached out to me literally on the first day that I was in the studio. It was a Wednesday afternoon. And I saw the Twitter handle, and I was like, who the heck is Anna LeBaron? Yeah, because I didn't know. And so at that point I was, literally I was in the studio for 10 hours that day. And when I got back to my hotel room, I Facebook messaged one of our aunts. And I just asked her if she knew who Anna was and what her story was. And so she responded almost immediately. Irene Spencer was her name. And she, said that Anna was a really positive person and had nothing but wonderful things to write about her. And so I had to decide, at that point, I don't think I even realized then that it was Ervil's daughter. I knew she was my cousin, but not that it was Ervil's daughter. And then the next day, I still hadn't responded to Anna, and she tweeted me back and totally apologizing for reaching out to me so casually and not understanding that I was her cousin, which I totally understood. And so I private messaged her at that point. And, my initial thought when I found out that she was Ervil's daughter, because she tweeted me that she was at that point. And so I private messaged her and I said, hey, if you want to talk, if you want to connect, and if you want to help promote my book, I would love that. But I wanted her to read a copy first. Before we decided to meet or to talk on the phone or to do anything.
Right.
Just so that she knew who I was. And I wanted people to believe in the story and to love the story, because that really, it's the springboard for making things happen.
It's also very, the story itself is an intimate story. So if they don't understand that and
right. Yeah. Yeah. And it was an opportunity for her to get to know who I was and, for her to know if she wanted to meet me and to help me with my book. So we set up a time to call. I had sent her the book to her home in Dallas in the meantime, right when I got home back to Portland, Oregon. And we set up a time to call within a week and a half, within the first 2 weeks of the initial tweet. And she had finished my book at that point. She'd received it. She'd finished it.
I'm sure.
And it made for a very emotional conversation, obviously. I mean, both of our stories are so intense and emotional and so profound and powerful that the phone conversation, I heard her voice when we called each other for the first time, and it was like, oh my gosh, she totally sounds like a LeBaron.
Really?
It felt like family right away. Totally. And so interesting, because even though our families broke apart so many years, literally, I was born in 1972, and the brothers and the churches had already split at that point. And so I had never in my life thought about Ervil, my Uncle Ervil, and his children, or what they might be doing in life. So it was such a shock, but also such a nice surprise to realize that because I had run away from LeBaron when I was so young, I didn't have that family attachment that I left, and I really feel like I've missed out on not knowing my sisters and my half sisters from my dad's side of the family. So it was a delight. She was a delight, and I was so excited that we were able to connect. And it was so interesting to me too, because even though our families had split, there were so many similarities in our stories, which I thought was, really speaks to that mentality, the mentality that we were raised with, and how that affected our lives. But as we were talking on the phone, she said, Ruth, I have sisters in Portland. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I had no idea that Ervil LeBaron's children were here in Portland. And so at that point, my husband, Alan, and I were like, we really need to meet these women.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so Anna ended up visiting that December. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was literally within 3 months. She was up here. I met two of her sisters that live here, and it was an incredible experience. It was amazing, and it was enlightening in the sense that it was familiar, and I felt connected to family again, to the LeBaron side of my family, and so that part of it was really special for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anna, let's go back to that phone conversation when Ruth sent you her book and you read it. What was it like for you to read The Sound of Gravel?
Well, it was completely an emotional experience, like overwhelmingly emotional.
Yeah.
I cried my way through it. And I had received the book the day before our scheduled conversation phone call, and started it that night, stayed up until probably 2. I could not put it down. Mm-hmm. It was so riveting. I couldn't put it down until my eyes just refused to stay open. I woke up at 5, made a pot of coffee, and kept right on going, and finished it the minute before our conversation was going to happen.
Really?
And
oh my goodness, I just got goosebumps.
So did I.
I was so grateful to have completed and finished reading the book, because my heart was just split right open at that point when the phone rang and I was talking to Ruth, and just experiencing her life through her eyes and through her writing, and then getting to talk to her after the history that our family shares was an honor. It was emotionally impactful. Mm-hmm. And I won't ever forget that conversation, ever. Just because of what it meant to both of our families. I'm sitting here crying, just remembering it.
And there's been a ripple effect, don't you think?
Yes.
From just our conversation and then meeting in person. Mm-hmm. So it was early December, right, that you came? And Alan and I picked her up at the airport, and we were supposed to videotape it, but I was pretty emotional and nervous, so I forgot to. I forgot to take pictures of that moment. But yeah, I saw her waiting outside the airport, and I was just like, oh my God, she even looks like me. It was pretty incredible. So yeah, that familiarity with her, that reminded me so much of LeBaron in my childhood.
Now, I think it's pretty important for us to give some context, just a little bit more context about the background at this point, because you're saying, Ruth, that when you saw Anna and knowing it was Ervil's child and everything, that you were feeling familiarity, you were not having bad feelings, it sounds like, about it. But can you tell us why that is so significant?
Well, I had never known my father. I was 3 months when he was killed. And when I was a child, I had always been told that it was Ervil LeBaron that had my father assassinated. And so, later on, we found out that definitely it was true. And it was a scary childhood because Ervil had been like literally this very real threat and shadowy ghost that haunted our community. There were threats. He and his church members were threatening our people, as we used to call them, are the LeBaron people. And so he had always been like that monster in my childhood, that terrifying thing that I knew had my father killed. But when I talked to Anna, I realized the meeting was so important for me and meaningful for me because I had escaped too. And so once I talked to Anna and she told me her story, I identified so well with that part of it. I identified profoundly with her experience and her need to get away and her need to tell her story. And so there was that connection. And I also, because I was able to break away, I knew that it wasn't, in spite of what had happened with our fathers and me having grown up without a dad as a result, that was not her responsibility. It was not her family's responsibility. And, there was I think because of our stories and our childhoods, I had a natural compassion for her and her story that really reflected onto me. I mean, it helped me be more compassionate for myself too, understanding that other people had gone through similar stories. And I never imagined, in spite of how scary the idea of Ervil was growing up, I never imagined that he might be inflicting that kind of horror onto his own family in different ways. And, after reading Anna's book, it was incredibly eye-opening and so heartbreaking too. But yeah, so for me, it was meaningful to reconnect with that part of the family because I had shut the door on them in a lot of different ways. And so it was that opportunity to heal even a little more and a little deeper.
So Anna, were you nervous it sounded like you were nervous when you realized who Ruth was. Were you nervous to break that ice? Were you nervous about what she would think of you?
Yes, I was absolutely nervous about that because there's always been a stigma attached to being Ervil LeBaron's child because of the atrocities that he was responsible for and that he had committed against people that we loved and cared about. And so wearing that stigma and that shame has been a part of my life, my entire life. And knowing that we were we were not welcome in that community where Ruth was born into and raised in. I was born there too, but we left when I was 9 months old. And our whole family had left and departed that community. And we just weren't welcome there. We knew that that with Joel's family and, the impact that our father had on that entire community of people that cared and loved and respected and even revered Joel, my father's brother. And so, we knew that there was this, Chinese wall, this big, huge chasm between the two families.
Definitely. That was my feeling about, that was definitely me growing up in LeBaron, and Joel was my father. He was also the prophet of our community and the prophet of our church. And that's definitely what my mom believed and what our family believed. And they still, in LeBaron, colonial LeBaron, people still believe that my dad was indeed a prophet. And because of the fact that he was 49 when he was killed, he had 42 children and 7 wives at the time. And, you can imagine the hole in our community and how that affected so many of us. And for me, my dad was more like that mythical Christ-like figure in my life. He was the one of the founders of our church and a spokesperson for God. I mean, that's what I was always taught. And so I think there still is, even today, there's a fear. And I don't know if it's a fear or a judgment. And I don't know what the word would be exactly to describe what the LeBarons feel. They call them the Joelites, which I hadn't realized. We always called Anna's family the Herbalites, and they called us the Joelites, but I didn't know that until I met Anna. So now we distinguish our families between the Joelites and the Herbalites. But yeah, it's been a wound to that community that has not yet healed, I would say, definitely.
So when I tweeted her not knowing who she was, and here's the thing, if I had known who she was, I would never have sent the tweet. We would have never met.
Wow.
But
That's right.
because I wasn't familiar with the name Ruth Wariner.
Yeah, I took my mother's maiden name. I've never had the legal name LeBaron, even though my dad was Joe LeBaron. And lots of different reasons behind that, but all of my mom's children were named after her. Her name was Wariner. And so people have always gotten that confused, right? And I knew Anna was a LeBaron. I knew she was my relative when I saw her name, but there was really no way that you would know that name.
If I had known who she was and whose daughter she was, I would have known my place. And my place would be no contact.
Wow.
Don't reach out. Don't bridge that. It's not my place to bridge that gap.
Right. And you would have had no idea either that I escaped too.
Right.
You had she wouldn't have known that my story was what it was and that we had so many similarities in that way, for sure.
So it was a memoir, and I love memoirs.
Yep.
So
nonfiction.
So I just randomly and off the cuff just tweeted the author, and
Anna had worked on books before, so you had already been interested, and she'd been working on social media. She's very good at it, by the way. But yeah, so she had a history in promoting books, so it was kind of a natural fit. Interestingly enough, about how it all came together. But you're right about that. I hadn't even thought about that myself, that you wouldn't have reached out to me had you known I was a LeBaron. That's interesting.
Right. So I'm grateful that I didn't know who she was, and that I had the audacity to just tweet one of Joel's daughters out of the blue and randomly and then make this connection that has just become part of our story.
It has been, yeah.
And I say that you're part of my happily ever after.
I think so too. And in fact, I'm going to write about this in my next book. When I get to meet you, it's going to be awesome.
And I should write about it in mine too.
Yeah, when I'm writing about getting published and reading my audiobook and what that's like, it's going to be so exciting.
I'm excited to read that. Can I help you with that one too?
Yes, please.
I'm in.
Take all the help we can get. As we know, all three of us are authors. We need help from each other for sure. Yeah.
Authors unite,
Absolutely.
So that was an experience that I will never forget. I'm grateful that I didn't know who you were, so that this connection could become something what it is now, and just real special.
It is very special, and Anna's awesome. Not only is she doing tremendous good in the world, but so are her sisters. And they're they live 2 neighborhoods away from me. They're so close, 20-minute drive from my house here in Portland, and so that's been pretty awesome. Yeah.
Wow, that connection, that family connection. It sounds like the healing that has come with that has been so significant, even beyond, writing a book about your story. There's so much healing that can take place with that. But then, you had no idea what would happen when you came together with, you never would have been able to orchestrate it. You never would have been able to ask for it. No. It was such a gift, it sounds like.
Oh, a tremendous gift, a tremendous blessing for sure. And
for
both of us, yeah. And I feel like I've been connected in a way to my father in a way that I haven't been before. And actually, I've met a couple of times now with Anna and her family, her siblings, my family too. And just hearing their stories and their perspectives about what the stories were about my dad, and what the stories were about, that side of my family that I didn't know a lot about. It's been amazing.
So, Ruth, one of the things that you had mentioned was by meeting Anna and hearing her story and having compassion for her, you were able to have more compassion for yourself. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Part of my journey with what's happened in my life, there's been a lot of, growing up in fundamentalism that way, I didn't feel in it was such a big family, but not only that, just the beliefs about women and their place. And there was also a lot of abuse in my childhood. And so I had always been really hard on myself in my journey. And I suffered with a lot of guilt because my mom really wanted her family to be raised in the fundamentalist church that my dad started. So that has been, that guilt and the shame, it's caused a lot of suffering, and my suffering has been a teacher in a lot of ways, but it's also been torture in a lot of ways. And just seeing that Anna and her sisters have done so well with their lives outside the church that they grew up in, and to see how far Anna had come, I could see the same in my own life, that I was able to do the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it almost sounds like by seeing somebody else experiencing what you experienced, in a sense, that it was almost like permission.
Yeah. To give yourself permission to forgive yourself and forgive the situation.
That you're not the only one. And
yeah, that's right.
And to acknowledge how far you've come.
Yeah, exactly. That was part of it too. Absolutely.
That those huge steps that
they
you took.
were huge steps. And then it was awesome too that it kind of fell in line with the publication of my book. I mean, the timing of it that way. I met her in December and it came out in January, and it was time for me to heal, and it was time for me to let go a lot of those feelings. Yeah.
So, Anna, I can only imagine that there was a number of things that this has brought about healing in you. What for you have you noticed, this in particular, this interaction with Ruth, how that has impacted your healing process?
Well, knowing Ruth, knowing what she's been through, having read her book, knowing our family history, and being able to process that in terms of that I've been a part of the healing for both of us, just knowing that what I've done and how I am, just me being myself on social media and me doing the thing that I'm gifted at and just being the person that I'm created to be has helped. It's just amazing that I can be myself and make an impact in the world.
Yeah.
And that me being myself is enough.
I love that.
That has been one of the biggest realizations that has come about in the past 2 years, is that I can be myself and engage with the world and make an impact, and that it's enough.
It is enough, and it's enough to create miracles.
I know.
I'm just think about it. It still gives me chills.
I mean, out of all the billions and billions of
People.
tweets,
yeah.
all the billions of tweets online, and I just happened across the one.
The one.
That to me is not an accident.
I don't think it is either.
So,
not at all.
So I'm eternally grateful.
I am too. It's been awesome.
The healing that has taken place in each of you individually, and then in the relationship between the two of you, seems to have freed you to be able to offer what other people might need to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to worry about, all that fear and trepidation of what the other person's thinking, but you're able to just
be ourselves.
Yeah.
As I was saying earlier. Yeah, there's an authenticity in that, I think, that's really important, and that will have an impact on people who hear our story, our stories.
One of the things that I have read about that I love the idea of is holding space for someone. And I think Ruth and I have done that for each other very well. We've held space for each other to kind of navigate.
And be ourselves, like you said.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that is so important. And it is impactful on other people, because then they see that they can do the same in their own lives.
So navigating this relationship as tenuous as it started out.
Mm-hmm.
And, and keeping in mind that each of our families, which they're very large and many people are impacted.
Mm-hmm.
I know from my perspective and from where I'm sitting, me telling my story has upset the apple cart for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and
I
so,
can imagine.
Having both of us, in a short period of time, both of us telling our stories and people being able to see the impact of our family history on each of our lives. And then all the people that are impacted by the fact that we've decided to tell our stories.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a way I'm holding space for a lot of people to kind of navigate through the feelings that are brought up and bubble up as a result. Even if they haven't read the books, just the fact that the books are out there impacts people's lives.
Absolutely.
And so there's that little bit of, where you just hope for the best outcome possible.
Exactly, for everybody involved. Yeah, absolutely. And I think another important part to this is that Anna and I can be support for each other because of the types of stories that they are, because of the impact it's having on our families. We have an understanding for that part of our lives and that the choices that we made to tell our stories. And I think that's been important too.
But I think it applies to even small families. Normal families.
Absolutely.
Normal families. Where, people grow up and there's any type of trauma or abuse.
It happens everywhere.
Anybody that finds their voice and speaks up and tells the stories of what happened, the whole family is going to be impacted.
Right. I agree.
So have either one of you had any resistance to sharing your stories with the world?
Oh my gosh. I know that for me, having witnessed other people in our family having written their stories and then listened as people reacted to and responded to the things that were shared, that it's a difficult situation to be in, telling such intimate details about your family, and then finding out that those things have impacted other people, sometimes in negative ways. And that has been a reality for me, hearing from family and then hearing from others who hear from family, where that what you've done by sharing your story has impacted others negatively. And that's a hard thing.
It is.
It's a hard thing to process and navigate and work through. However, I knew that it would impact people just because I'd seen it happen so many times before, because there have been so many books written about our family. Even a made-for-TV movie that was just horrible and horrifying to watch myself.
Yeah, it was for me too. Yeah,
just watching what happened, in the fact that these things transpired in our lives, and then having to relive them through other people's eyes.
Through another perspective. Absolutely.
Right. And that's the key, was that it's somebody else's perspective.
Yeah.
So when I watched that made-for-TV movie in 1993 on television, it was so, it was impactful in that it was told through somebody's eyes that I wasn't very familiar with. And so the scenes and the things that played out, I was a little bit surprised, like, oh my gosh, this seems odd or unreal. But it was actually very real. Yeah. And so but it wasn't my perspective.
Right.
The story wasn't told through my eyes.
It wasn't your experience.
And so that's when I started writing, I had gotten to the place where I knew that everyone has a story and every story matters. And even me writing my story was going to impact people, but my story mattered. And so me being able to tell my story, even knowing that people were going to be having to make shifts in their insides,
in their own understanding,
of what happened. Those shifts were going to happen, and it was going to be difficult for some people. I just felt like I've known I needed to tell my story for decades.
Me too.
And had to go through a long healing process, my own self personally, before I could get to the point where I could tell my story and share those really intimate, really impactful things that happened to me with the world.
And that was something, it was a conflict that I had, honestly, as I was writing, because it was so important for me to be honest and for me to share my truth and my experience, because I hadn't felt hurt as a child. And really, when I started writing my book, it was more for family. I wanted my younger siblings to remember our mother and, to know who she was, because they didn't have any memory of her. But I wanted them to know who she was through the experience that I had with her from my perspective. And that part of it was really important to me. And so my memoir ended up becoming more of a we-moir, I guess. It was about our family experience. But I was very concerned about how that was going to affect my family. And that definitely influenced the way that I wrote about the religion in the book, because I have so many family members that are wonderful and I adore that are still practicing polygamists and practicing fundamentalists, and that still believe that my dad is the prophet. And so I knew that as I was writing, and I took that into consideration. And by the time I was ready to share my manuscript with the publisher, I had my siblings that I'm closest to, which are all of my mother's children. I had them read it, and I wanted feedback from them, and I wanted them to be okay with the way that I told the story. But it was impossible, obviously, to break outside that and to get feedback from people outside of my nuclear family. So my brother Matt, who is still in the religion, he still lives in colonial LeBaron, he read it and he loved it. And so for me, that was so important. And he also helped me. I had been 20 years removed from my childhood in LeBaron when I first started writing. And I was reflecting and remembering. I used a lot of photographs. I'd been back to the colonial LeBaron a few times, and it helped with my writing and my memories. But he definitely helped fill in a lot of the little memories and the little stories that we both remembered. We spent a lot of time in thoughtful conversation about what happened. And I remember asking him, I'm like, did this happen? Is this true? Because it was so bizarre to me after having left the town for 20 years, basically. And so, it was important for me that it was okay with him, because I didn't want it to hurt our relationship in real life. And, it was exciting that he was able to not only understand my perspective, and he said, I know that this is your perspective. And he was very understanding of that, and not only understanding, but he was excited for me, and he wanted to know, as the book was being released, he wanted to know how it was doing. And so that part I feel really good about, that my mom's family, that the family that I'm closest to, was okay with the story, and not only okay with it, but they loved it. And they all said that it was healing for them to read through from my perspective and understand where I was coming from, and really understand why we ran away. That was, I think, a big part of it for me, for my little sisters to understand that.
Because you played a big part in getting your sisters out as well.
Yeah, my stepfather, my mother passed away in a tragic accident, and we lost a little brother. And they were 5 months, 2 and 4 years old. And my brother Aaron was only 10. I had a special needs brother who was Luke, who was 17. And I was 15. And we had grown up with a stepfather, another polygamous man who also believed in my father and his priesthood. He'd been incredibly abusive as we were growing up. And I found out not long after my mom died that he was continuing to abuse my special needs brother. And it was at that point that I called my brother Matt, who was working in the States. He was only 18, already out on his own. He left home at 14 and had been working hard labor and construction for those 4 years. And I called him, I explained the situation. And, after my mom died, there was this part of me that was so profoundly just this really strong primal mother bear instincts that I had for my sisters, because my stepfather, even right after my mom's funeral, kept wanting to take my little 4-year-old sister and be alone with her. And I was like, there's no way you're taking that little girl anywhere without me. Mm-hmm. And, he had apologized for his abuse. He's abusive of all different kinds. And he apologized, and everybody's like, well, he's repented. You need to forgive him. And, and that's how the community responded to him. And when I found out about my brother, I was like, there's no way we're staying. There's no way that he's going to start taking my little sisters and being alone with them. And so I called my brother Matt. My stepfather had left. He had work in the States, and we didn't know when he was coming back. And I called my brother. I told him exactly what was going on. And I said, you are not going to leave us here anymore. I was just like, there was no way. My mom wasn't there anymore. She wasn't keeping us. And that had always been, she had been the rock. She was the person that did everything for us. And he came down literally the next night in an old Oldsmobile station wagon. We threw all the kids' stuff in the car. He turned off the lights, and we literally just lurched out of town so nobody would notice in the middle of the night. It was terrifying because we didn't know when Lane was coming back. We didn't know when his family was going to see us leaving. And by the time we got to the border, the sun was rising. We were going into the border at Arizona. And it was probably a few of the longest seconds of my life as we were waiting. I don't know if for people that have been in border town situations, the lines are long. And it was always frightening to me to cross the border either into Mexico or to the United States. But it was something that we were definitely well practiced with. But we had never crossed the border without my mom. And my brother was in the car. I was in the car, and my sisters, and I was teaching them how to say, to say American, so that when they asked us our nationality, we'd all be ready to say American. The Border Patrol woman, I remember she shined her flashlight inside the car. She looked at each of us and she said, why were you in Mexico? And so my brother said the same thing that my mom had always used to say. And it was, we were buying clothes for the kids over the weekend. And she looked around. She didn't have any reason to believe that, we were newly orphaned or that our mother had just passed away and we were taking the kids away from their father. And she let us through. And that was literally the moment in my life, definitely, when my time and my childhood in LeBaron, it was the point that was, it was like that knife that cut my life into parts. Coming out of that, we were safe. We lived with my grandmother. And so that part of it was good. But I also left behind my family and the life that I knew. And I was raising a family at that point. My little sisters, my grandmother wasn't in position to take care of them by herself. So I stayed home with them and helped her with them. And then eventually we moved out when I was 19 with my sisters, and I raised them in Southern Oregon. And so we were always, when I was raising my sisters, I was first just a teenager, a woman in her early 20s as a single parent with them. And, it was so important for them to understand what had happened, that they didn't have a memory about. But since the book has come out, I've had a little bit of resistance from the people in Colonial LeBaron, my family there. And I think really the hardest thing for them, my half-sisters, like I said, who, they're wonderful parents and they're wonderful people, but they don't understand the situation that I left in. And I think that the most resistance that I've had have been from people that haven't even read the book. They haven't read it. They don't understand the perspective. And so I've had one sister in particular call me out pretty meanly on social media, on Facebook, publicly. You know, she hasn't had a conversation with me in years. And in fact, I don't know her very well. She's quite a bit older than I am. But I also realized too that she's in her 60s or in her late 50s, and she remembers my father. You know, she remembers the man who was charismatic and who was a leader and who created this church. He was obviously very confident and a visionary. And that's the person she remembers him being. And I don't have that connection with my father. And I think that just the fact that I'm questioning whether or not what he said was true, whether or not he was a prophet, has really impacted her personally. That I would consider that, no, he was not a prophet. You know does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that part of it is very personal and very real for her in a way that it's not for me. And I understand that.
Yeah, Ruth, that really, this idea that the people who have provided the most resistance to your book and to you, those people haven't even read the book. That sounds a lot like growing up and not having a voice, not being able to share the story, to share your perspective. Right. When other people were telling you you needed to forgive Lane, your stepfather, when they were saying he's repentant, he's, you need to just forgive him now.
Yeah.
Did that cause you to question your own perspective?
Oh, I definitely did not feel listened to. And the fact that so many people supported my stepfather in spite of knowing how abusive he'd been definitely affected the way that I felt about myself. I've struggled with feelings of very, insecure feelings, and also not knowing how to value myself because I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel heard. And that was definitely part of it, the way that the community reacted, but really more importantly, the way that my mom reacted and her decision to stay had a profound impact on my life. And I did struggle with a lot of self-doubt. I thought I was going crazy. Like, I know I had always been very intuitive, and there was always something about my stepfather that really bothered me. I did not want to be around him. And even before he became abusive, he was very religious, and, but I knew there was something that wasn't right about him. And so part of me learned to trust that little voice inside me, that intuition that I felt, and that I felt very alone in feeling. But as my stepfather became more and more abusive, I realized that there was something real about the way I felt, and that I needed to listen to that. And it was that same intuition that when I found out he was abusing my special needs brother, it was that intuition again that told me I needed to leave. And because it had been right before, just in that instance, especially in regards to my stepfather, I knew that I needed to listen to it.
Yeah, your book indicated that you were really resolute at that point, that you knew.
Oh, yeah.
You just knew.
Oh,
whereas before you might have been questioning, but then when it happened to somebody else, and when it was possible that it might be happening to other people in your family, that mother bear said no.
No way.
So Anna, Ruth mentioned her mother, and the fact that her mother stayed was a significant difficulty for her. What was it like for you, knowing your mother and her background, and the fact that after you left, she stayed?
Well, my mother is still alive. So that was one of the things that I had to consider strongly in deciding to write my book. For the longest time, I thought, I'll wait till she passes, because she doesn't know a lot of these things that happened to me, and I know it would just break her heart to read about them. But then that's not how things ended up being, which I wrote the book even though she was still alive and with us. And I knew that it would impact her life to read these stories, and for me to talk about the tenet of polygamy that she still very strongly believes in and resonates with, and that guides her faith and her practices. And so I had to overcome some of that resistance within my own self to talk about the things that happened to me, knowing that it would be very difficult for my mother to read those things and to share those things. Like, a lot of people don't want to tell their parents when negative things happen to them.
Yeah.
There's just some kind of a silencer or something that happens inside of children when bad things happen to them, and telling others is just hard. Especially telling your own parents. And so that was something that I had to overcome.
Why do you think that is the way that it is? Why is it so hard to tell our parents?
Oftentimes when things are happening to children, oftentimes they're being told, don't tell.
Right.
And threatened and bullied into not telling. And so that's part of the experience. But then you also have that internal dialogue that happens that makes you afraid to speak up or to say what's happening.
Absolutely. I think there's a tremendous amount of, my experience was the same, and that there was a tremendous amount of manipulation, emotional manipulation from my stepfather. He was always saying, I watched my mom. She had 10 kids and was 38 when she died, and she had 3 special needs kids. I mean, it was a tough situation, and I had watched her suffer so much. And so when my stepfather was abusive, he asked me not to tell because he didn't want me to hurt her. And so that was something that was very sensitive to me. And because of the narcissistic personality that he had, he knew the parts of me that were, easy to manipulate. And there's also the part in children that blames ourselves. And so it's scary to tell somebody else that we may have done something wrong. It was hard for me, really, as a child, not to blame myself for what was happening in my life, and to not have a sense of shame for myself and my body and who I was. And that made it harder to talk about, for sure.
Yeah. So Anna, you eventually did share your book with your mother, right?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about what that experience was like.
When I started writing, I knew that I needed to tell my mom that I was writing, and she was naturally very nervous about what I was going to say. So one of the things that I did during the process of writing the book was I just maintained some contact with her periodically and sporadically, letting her know what was happening in the publishing process, because it's a very long process. So it was several years of updating her and letting her know where we were at. And then I told her that once I had turned in the entire manuscript to the publisher, that I would get on a plane and come visit her and sit with her and read it to her. I wanted her to know what was in the book or what was going to be written about before the book, showed up on her doorstep, delivered by the postman. I didn't want her to be blindsided, and to sit understanding that her choices, her actions and decisions impacted my life so negatively. I didn't want her to sit with that alone. I wanted to be there beside her and allow her to see that I had grown and matured and healed. I wanted her to see that with her own 2 eyes, in flesh and blood. I wanted to be in her presence, to be a comfort to her heart with my very presence.
Giving her that space that you talked about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, like so many people in my family, especially my immediate family, my mother's children, they have a lot of conflicting feelings, and as well as I do. I have conflicting feelings about my own mother because she holds to those faith practices that were so devastating to so many people's lives. And so there's a lot of conflicting feelings. Even though I feel tenderly towards my mom, there's still that aspect of being in a relationship with her that's in conflict with my own values and moral standards and things that I hold as dear in my own faith practices. So she, that conflict is there. It's internal and it's ever present. in every interaction I have with her. But I will say that having her grieve and mourn while I was reading, even though she regretted, because one of the things, Ruth, that you touched on earlier is that there are people in the community you were born and raised in that still believe that Joel was the prophet. I will say that there is nobody that I'm aware of that's alive today that believes that Ervil was any kind of prophet at all.
Wow.
Not even my own mother, who followed him to his death.
I didn't know that. That's
she does not believe that he was a true prophet anymore. So just knowing that she wasn't able to shift and make that shift away from that kind of thinking and that mentality that kind of keeps you in that
stuck, sort of.
Kind of stuck.
Yeah.
In her mind, she's not stuck.
Right.
She has a different perspective.
That's our perspective.
Than I do.
Right.
But from where I'm sitting, she's very stuck. That there's conflicting feelings in this relationship that I have with my mother. And yet the community that she's involved in right now doesn't require her to not have contact with people that are outsiders or considered outsiders. So for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Because I have been able to have these experiences with her, even though internally there's still
the conflict.
That conflict.
Absolutely. It makes sense. It totally makes sense. And that's something about my story that has been really hard for me, is to not have that opportunity to have the conversation with my mom.
Is there a part of you now I'm talking and now I'm having a little
the
chat
interviewer
with
now.
Please feel free.
Is there a part of you that can look at my experience with my own mother and think she might have had that same response?
She might have, and that's a good question. You know, when I think about my childhood, had my stepfather been the one who passed and not her, would she have married another polygamist and stayed?
Oh my gosh, I had not thought about that.
Yeah. So, that's a good question. And I spent years in therapy, and my idea about my mother was always that she would have eventually left, because all of my stepfather's wives did leave him eventually. And, that we would be friends, because I still felt so close to her as a teenager when she died. And there were so many feelings of betrayal that I didn't get to resolve with her. And, thinking back, during my therapy, actually, and this is something that my therapist said to me, she said, but do you think you'd have a close relationship with your mother had she survived? And my initial feeling was, yes, of course. I would have forgiven her. It would have been amazing. She would have been my friend, and I would have known her as an adult, and all of my life's problems would have been solved. But, that might not be the case. I mean, I don't know how extensive the abuse might have been towards my other siblings, and, and how disturbed I might have been had my mother never left. Those are all unanswered questions for me.
Well, I have siblings who have very difficult feelings towards my mother.
Yeah,
because
I can
she
imagine.
Still believes those things.
Yeah, and hearing your story about your relationship with your mom too, I realized that mine probably wouldn't have been very perfect either. That I probably would have been dealing with a lot of conflict, and in fact, it is true for me and my brother and I. My brother Matt and I were very close when we were young. And when he decided to go back to LeBaron and take a second wife, he has 15 children now and has been married a few times. But that's something that's hard for me. I mean, how do I, it's been hard for us to be able to continue to have that close relationship and to relate to each other's experiences in life, because the decisions that my mother made and that my stepfather made in polygamy were so devastating to my life. And so it's hard for me to watch him go back to it, even though I don't think his situation is not as harsh as ours was growing up. So he has evolved in that sense. He's not nearly as abusive, and they have a better lifestyle than I did when I was there. But yeah, definitely the way women are and children are treated, it's hard for me to watch. It's hard for me to see that happening again in my family.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah.
At what point did you each begin to believe that your voice actually did matter, that you mattered, and that you expressing your thoughts and feelings, that people might actually listen? At what point did that actually happen for you?
Well, I'll just start and tag team off of what Ruth was saying earlier about therapy.
Yeah,
Please do.
For me, it was when I started my down the road and the healing path that I took, when I accepted an invitation from a friend that offered to make an appointment for me with a lay ministry counselor at her church. And I didn't know I needed therapy.
Yeah.
But she could obviously see the signs that I was in distress emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so she made that appointment for me. And then after an hour with this woman, she wisely referred me to a licensed professional therapist. And that began a 5-year journey of what my therapist called peeling back the layers of an onion. Mm-hmm. And when I first sat down in her office with her, emotionally, I was very stuck. I was very shut down. Mm-hmm. When you're raised in that environment, mm-hmm. and even after getting out, finding your voice, finding your feelings, finding expression for the emotions, the thoughts, mm-hmm. was a really big part of my healing process. I learned how to cry, how to grieve, which those were things that I was a grown woman with children of my own. Mm-hmm. And did not know how to express grief. I did not know how to express emotion. Mm-hmm. I had what I call a very limited range emotionally. I couldn't go very far negative and I couldn't go very far positive, just because being raised in and groomed for eventually becoming a sister wife, you're taught to shut down emotionally.
You have to.
You're taught to restrict your emotional expression. And so you live a very limited human experience.
Absolutely.
Without that big, wide range of emotion that's possible and that's very normal.
That's human.
That's very human. And so just being able to tap into and access that emotional expression was such a big part of my healing journey. Just having a tear come out of the corner of my eye. It took me 5 years
to give yourself permission to feel.
Yes. Mm. And so the way I talk about it now is because I'm now able to express the negative emotions, grief and anger and, rage. Sometimes I have permission for that expression in the healthy environment, in a healthy way. There's a healthy expression of anger.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Just having access to those negative emotions and the freedom to express them mm-hmm. has given me access to the range on the other end of the spectrum, to all the joys and happinesses and the peace and love mm-hmm. in its very wide space.
Yeah.
Hear.
Yeah, so inspiring. That's amazing.
How did other people respond to you, Anna, when you did start to express yourself? Were they, the people that were around you, did they notice a sudden change? Did they accept this new expression of your humanity?
Good question.
It wasn't sudden. Like I said, it took 5 years for me to just crack open that inner space inside of me that had just been held down for so long. And then, once the dam broke, I think I cried for days and months, to have let all that grief out that had just been held in for so long. But it did take even years after that. Mm-hmm. My healing journey has been decades long.
Yeah.
And I will say that my sister that's closest to me, Celia, that I write about a lot in the book just because we had so many shared experiences. She has said probably in the last 2 years or so. So that's why I'm saying this was a decades long process. So none of it was instant. Mm-hmm. None of it happened quickly. Mm-hmm. But she has watched me just blossom into the person that I naturally am, the person that is the me me, the real me. And she's just seeing from her perspective and from her eyes and hearing her talk about what she sees in me and how beautiful it is to her that I have finally found my voice, that I have found my full expression of who I am. And just seeing that through her eyes and having her express that to me has been such a powerful experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow.
How about you, Ruth?
Well, choked up.
We're still healing.
Yeah.
It's still a process. We're still finding our way, and I'm still finding ways to express my voice and to say what I have, find the confidence within myself to express myself and to feel those feelings too. Yeah, because you are, for me, while I was raising my sisters, I really feel like I was on autopilot for so many years. And I just got up. I got up and I made sure everybody was fed, and I was in a state of survival for many years. And when I finally finished graduate school and started teaching, and I had the benefits to get help, I started to go first to group grief counseling. And I started there, and I sat down in a group situation with a minister, and there were other people who had just suffered tragedy. And I started to talk about my mom and my brother and my little sister and my situation. I was shaking and crying. And after the meeting, a couple of people walked up to me afterwards and asked me about how long it had been since my mom passed and we left LeBaron. And I said it had been 15 years. And they were like, you act like it's something that happened yesterday. And I realized, there was so much going on inside of me that I had not given myself the permission to feel and to heal. And in a lot of ways, raising 3 kids by myself was a distraction from who I was and how much I was suffering. So because I was so young, I think, it was something that eventually became okay, because I started to seek counseling and help when I was about 30. I was 29, I think, and when I first started going to therapy. And I think I was ready. I was ready to express that trauma, and I was ready to begin to let go of it. And it was definitely, I feel like I started to learn about who I was really when I was going to college. I took a lot of world religions classes, and I was just fascinated by the idea of comparative religions and the philosophy of religion. And I wanted to dig so deeply into that because I wanted a loving God, and I wanted a God that was not what I grew up with. And so I desperately looked for that everywhere, and I found little nuggets of truth everywhere, and it ended up becoming a very personal journey for me, that part of it. And I really feel like sitting in some of those classrooms and thinking about those things and feeling inspired and feeling that I remember sitting down and just being lit up with inspiration about what I was learning and how exciting it was that I got to choose what I believed. And so I think it started there. And then, and it was the way that Anna expressed it. Her therapist called it peeling away the onion peels. Layers of an onion. And it was definitely like that for me too. And it still is that way. I was seeing a therapist for close to, I think I still go. I probably need to.
After this conversation. But that, that's where I really started to find a different way and started to break away from that fundamentalist way for women, where they didn't really get to express their feelings or ask for what they wanted. And even as I was raising my family, when my sisters finally moved out and they, when they were teenagers going off to college and everything, and I was on my own for the first time, I think I was 33 years old. I'd been in therapy for a few years at that point, but I had a major identity crisis because I had never learned
like I taught 4 of my younger siblings all how to drive. And we always were in the car together. We took our trips together. We did it all together. And I always listened to their music. You know, they were listening to Pearl Jam and all the 90s, big 90s rock people. And, you know, I love that music too, but it was always their choice. It was what they wanted. And so when my youngest sister moved out, I literally what do I like?
Sure.
What do I want? And I was in my mid-30s. I had never considered those things before, again, because I hadn't had the permission to do it. I was on this earth, you know, the way I was raised is I was on this earth to get married and have children, period. There was no room for wants and desires and choice. And found a tremendous amount of healing and freedom in realizing that I had that choice. Yeah, and it's been actually, it was intimidating at first, you know, having so much choice and trying to decide and really taking responsibility for my life and what I wanted to do with it. You know, those were huge steps for me. Therapy definitely helped me get there. But, you know, now it's fun for me. It's exciting to plan a trip and go somewhere and, you know, to have the freedom and the money to be able to do that. So that, you know, it was a tough road, but really, you know, it's been incredible to me to realize that who I am inside of me, that what God gave me, was a spirit that could survive and that's stronger than the circumstances I grew up in. And it's powerful. It's been empowering for me to recognize that.
Wow. I look at both of your stories and I realize that you both left their families, the polygamous cult at a young age. And Ruth, you were 15?
That's right.
And Anna, you were 13?
13.
Just think about that for a minute.
Mm.
The children who are out there who are 13 years old, 15 years old, how strong they are and could be. I was also just really struck by the idea that what you did and the way that you have continued to heal since then has said so much about what it means to escape this feeling of being trapped in emotional manipulation or physically being trapped. So I would like to ask you to consider here for a minute, what would you want to say to someone, be it a young woman, an older woman, even a man, who feels like they are trapped in a situation that is not good for them? What would you want to say to them?
I'll just go first.
Go for it. Yeah, if you have an answer, please.
What I would say is find a safe person and talk about your experience, about the feeling of being trapped, and then see where that conversation goes. Brené Brown talks about safe people in her books, Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection, and even Rising Strong. There are safe people in the world, whether that's a friend that you can have a cup of coffee with, a small group of people that you've come to trust with your stories. When you tell someone your story, it's important to have someone, like Brené Brown calls it, somebody that has earned the right to hear your story. And so
I love that.
So that's my thing is find the safe person, someone that's earned the right to hear your story. And even if that's a friend, a mentor, a counselor, somebody a minister type person that you have trust their guidance, or just a professional counselor, find someone and speak.
Absolutely. And Brené Brown, too, when I read one of her books years ago, said that there is a tremendous amount of shame in silence, and shame grows in silence. And that made so much sense to me. So I think the message to speak to someone, to speak your truth, to say your truth, and to talk to somebody is very important. And that was definitely my grandparents for me, having a place to run to when we escaped. And also what was important for me and my survival was that intuitive voice. Mm-hmm. And listening and trusting yourself and what's inside of you, and, you know, develop your intuitive muscles and question your feelings about situations that are uncomfortable. And even though things might seem okay, I think it's so important that we listen to ourselves. And that, for me, I feel like it was that part of my intuition that warned me and told me there was something terribly wrong with our situation when I was in LeBaron. Listening to that and trusting that gave me so much strength, and it literally saved my life. And we are given this intuition to protect us. I feel that it's a tremendous gift from God. It's something that I've always felt very blessed to have. And, you know, finding that part of ourselves and realizing that it is stronger than a situation, and it is possible to get help and survive. And, you know, finding the people you trust, that was a big part of my life for sure, in addition to that.
The other part is the part that helped me all along was reading books mm-hmm. that shaped the way I thought and mm-hmm. felt. I say books mentored me.
I think me too.
Because I was a voracious reader. Mm-hmm. And for anyone that feels stuck in a circumstance where there might be any kind of trauma or abuse, there's a really great resource from an author named Shannon Thomas. Mm-hmm. She has a book called Healing from Hidden Abuse. Mm. And that is a resource that I would recommend to anyone who's been through any type of abuse situation. And she calls them hidden abuses because there are so many abuses that don't leave marks and scars on the body. Mm-hmm. They leave marks and scars on the skin of your heart and your soul mm-hmm. and your spirit.
Right.
And so healing from those types of abuses that may not be visible to the human eye or to the people around you.
Or even to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great resource that I love to recommend to people who are beginning a journey. Just, it helps you recognize what's happening around you.
Yeah. What's the name of the author again?
Shannon Thomas.
Shannon Thomas. Okay.
She's a licensed professional therapist mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. that specializes in this type of, helping people heal from this type of abuse. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people, you don't have to have been grown up in a polygamist cult.
Absolutely. It's just an extreme situation,
right.
But it happens everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
To, resonate with the themes of our stories.
It's universal. There are a lot of universal aspects to our stories.
Mm-hmm. And the other part was when I worked with a therapist who's very recently been involved in my life in the last few years. Mm-hmm. And she was able to tell me that it was post-traumatic stress, mm-hmm. the anxiety triggered by post-traumatic stress. Just being able to name it was so helpful to me.
Yeah.
And it was like a relief mm-hmm. to like, oh my gosh, of course.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that what I had gone through was traumatic or even trauma.
Well, we didn't recognize it because that's the way everybody was treated.
It was normal.
It was normal.
It was our normal.
It was our normal.
And so having her identify that
for you
and name it mm-hmm. made the healing process go a little bit quicker for me.
That's great. Yeah.
And the other part I'll say is that healing is a moment. You can have moments in time where you make huge strides and you think, okay, this is it.
Yeah.
And then you realize a little bit later, oh, healing's a process.
Yeah, I thought I was better, darn it.
What?
I need more help.
I still need more work and still need to press in and do more. So healing has been a long process for me, decades-long journey. Mm-hmm. And so I want to encourage anyone listening that if they're just getting started or if they're, significantly down the road in their healing journey, if there's bumps in the roads that make you realize, oh, I need to kind of seek something out, seek more, that it's okay.
Mm-hmm. I think too, to your point about stories and books, I've always been influenced by them, but I have had experiences that are awesome just reading people's stories, even if they're fiction, but if I can relate to a particular character, I'm one who needs meaning in a story. I don't always just read for entertainment, although that's fun sometimes. But I really love having takeaways and being able to resonate with characters and learn from them and find meaning. And there have been some books in my life, some stories that have created little soul shifts. I don't know if you ever read like that amazing good book that like you could just feel yourself changing and growing as you're reading, because the stories are so incredible. And that's been a huge part of my healing process too. And I think that's why it's so important for us to find our voice and to find the ability to express it. Yeah. And tell it.
Some great advice. I want to close with one more question. And this is related to each of you and your mission now. Like, how do you want to use your voice in the world? You each have a platform now. You're authors, you're speakers. Who would you want to hear what you have to say? And what is it that you want to drive home?
The first word that comes to my mind with my own story and my own speaking practice is courage. To empower people to feel courageous, to take responsibility for their lives, and to know that who they are is stronger than what they grew up with or their current circumstances, and that we all have within us the power to change and to create a life that we love and make choices that are positive and impactful, both in our lives and the lives of others. And also, too, I think it's important that we tell these stories, in spite of how sometimes hard they can be, in a way that's powerful and empowering and not victim-minded, if that makes sense. So that, because I think it's so important for us to tell our stories in a way that doesn't make others or ourselves feel like a victim, because I don't think that's naturally who we are. I know for me personally, I had learned victim behavior, and I held on to that pattern, and it created a lot of grief in my own life. And as I was able to recognize that in myself and the choices I was making that brought that about, and how I felt like a victim, even after I became an adult, mature woman, that was something that helped me change quite a bit. I think that's important for people to understand.
For me, I would say that one of the biggest ideas that helped me has been one that I've been pursuing for probably the last decade, or a little bit more than a decade. And that's the idea of freedom. And the way it was defined by one of my spiritual mentors is freedom is becoming the person that you were created and redeemed to be. And so find that freedom journey that I have been on. I hope that anytime I have the opportunity to speak into the lives, especially of women, just because I am a woman, I resonate. I find that women can relate to me, even though men have related and spoken out and said things to me that about the way my story has impacted their lives. Mostly it's women that I kind of love. It has been for me too. Yeah. It's an incredible privilege and an honor to kind of enter into people's stories and hear them and listen to them tell their own stories. Everywhere I've been, hearing people say, me too, even though it's not polygamy. Right. It's other themes that resonate. And being able to kind of point out the path for where people can begin their own freedom journey, that's a privilege for me. And shining the light on, here's my story. This is where I began my freedom journey. And here's the path, and shining the light on that path so that others can begin walking their own. That's been important to me.
The freedom to be yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense.
Wow. You guys, this has been just truly an honor. It's been an incredible experience to hear you interact with one another and hear your story, your collective story, and then to really honestly be a witness over the past couple of years, myself personally, to seeing you guys really step into your voice of influence in the world. And I want to thank you for your courage and for your freedom that you have found, that you have courageously pursued, and that you are now offering others. So I thank you so much for your voice of influence. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's been an honor.
It has been an honor.
Now, right before we leave here, Ruth, where can people find you?
Through my website. I hear from a lot of people through email, basically. My website is ruthwariner.com. So my paperback is out, and it's great. I'm really excited about the paperback, actually, because there's an interview with me in the back of the book, and it's also got the additions with the book club questions.
Exciting.
Yeah, so that's been awesome. Yeah, it's a beautiful book, and I'm super excited about this next stage. And about writing again. And, yeah, so this has been awesome.
How about you, Anna?
My website is annalebaron.com, ANNALEBARON.com. I'm on social media. Anna K. LeBaron is my social media handle everywhere. So you can connect with me in any of those ways by email. Mm-hmm. My book is in stores everywhere and online. Both of our books are on Audible.
Yes, we both read our audiobooks. Right. And hers is called The Polygamist Daughter, and mine is The Sound of Gravel.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. You guys, thank you so much. I'm so glad that this worked out.
Thanks for being a part of this and for welcoming us. You've been a wonderful host.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.